Good day everyone. Good day ma'am. I'm Ramen Bukoy and I am going to discuss about my topic which is all about the transitivity, characterization, and literary genre. So before we proceed to our topic, let's define what is transitivity. So the word transitivity is a grammatical describing how a verb interdepends on an object to receive an action. So meaning to say this, the word transitivity is something to do with a system that is concerned with how entities and actions in a situation or such circumstances are encoded in the language we use. Moreover, according to stylistic, the word transitivity is related to valency because both provide a clear description of the influence of verb agreement on a direct objects used in a particular statement or in a sentence. So therefore, the word transitivity is essential in stylistic because it enables the reader or the viewer itself to understand the goals or actions that is associated with a particular actor in a piece of literature work. So now, let's proceed to the processes of transitivity. So first is the material process. So the word material process is understood as the process of doing or happening in the transitive or intransitive clause. So when we say the word transitive, like it is something to do with when the action of the verb passes from the subject to the direct object, while the intransitive verbs or in clause, it usually or if often don't need a object to make sense or they have meaning on their own. So as you can see, there is an example shown in the presentation. He kicked the ball. So meaning to say, or in other words, the materials process is a arrangement of a process and participants involved require some input of energy to occur, and when the participants is likely to undertake a change, thus the energy flow marks the material process. So meaning it looks on the actions, activities, or even events. So the participant that becomes the source of energy, which the pronoun he, bringing about the charge, is called an actor, and other participants may be found in material processes, which is the goal, the affected, and agent. So second is the mental process. So the mental process is the process of sensing or feeling. So according to Downing and Locke state, the mental processes are those through that we organize or organize our mental contact with the world. So meaning to say, there are clauses of sensing. A mental clause construes a quantum of charge in the flow of events taking place in our own consciousness. So the process may be construed either as flowing from a person's consciousness or as impinging on it, but it's not construed as a material act. So there are two participants here in the mental processes, which is the sensor and the phenomenon. So the sensor is the one who senses, feels, and wants to perceive, while the word phenomenon is the participant which is felt, thought, wanted, or perceived. The position is in sense reverse. It may not only be a thing but also an act or fact. So example here in the presentation shown, in the mental processes like I saw the car, I like the football, I believe in ghosts. So something to do with a sensing or feeling. So for the third is the verbal processes. So the word verbal processes from the word itself verbal is something to do with a saying. So it is the process of saying. So according to Halliday 2004, he elaborates that the verbal process is an important resource in various kinds of discourse. This or the verbal process contribute to the creation of narrative by making it possible to set up dialogue passage. The use of verbal process thus is seen as an appropriate way to convey the speaker's idea to the addressee. So there's always one participant representing the speaker called a sayer. So a sayer is the participant that say the additional participant in verbal process as receiver. The verbiage, the verbiage and the target. So example in the verbal processes here is the I shouted, I told her a story. So something to do with a saying. So for the fourth is the relational processes. So these relational processes is the processes of being. So according to Halliday 2004, he defines that a relational process is the process to say that experience is modeled as being. So there are three types of relational process, namely the attributive, identifying, and the possessive process. So the meaning of this attributive is that, for example, the X is a member of the class A. So there are two participants here named as carrier and the attributive. So an identifying process has a token and a value as the participants. A token is the participant being defined, while the value is the participant which defines. So the last type of relational processes is the possessive. So it defines as the process of ownership and possession between closer participants. So according to the Locke and Edgins, they argue that the possessive process includes relationships of part to hold and ownership. So furthermore, it characterized that the possessive process closest normally to like simple present for now references and continuous tenses in general are seldom being used. So for the fifth is the behavioral processes. So the word behavioral process meaning the process of behaving. According to Edgins 2004 says that the behavioral processes are midway between materials on the one hand and mental on the other hand. So they are parts about action, but it is an action that has to be experienced by a conscious being. So example here in the presentation show, he breathes, she smiles. So a process of behaving. So furthermore, this behavioral processes typically processes of physical and psychological behavior. Some of the behavioral in fact contrast with mental process. Synonyms, example, look at his behavioral, but see is mental, right? So a behavioral process has one participant only, the behavior. So a behavior is a function or is typically a conscious being. Like for example, the sensor or the mental process. So a behavioral process functions more like one thing of doing than one of thinking or feeling. If there is another participant which is restatement of the process, it is called a phenomenon. Like I said a while ago, the two types of the sensing, right? Edgins also adds that behavioral are harm semantically and grammatically between mental and material process. So moving on with the last process, which is the existential processes. So the existential processes is understood as the process of existing. So according to Edgens 2004, he defines that that existential process experienced by posting that there was or is something. Existential is easy to identify since the structure involves there. So it is a dummy can also marks at or an existential process, such as it is a book on the table. It is a present in the class as a subject. Existential process typically employ the verb be or it synonymous such as exist, arise, and occur. An existent is the only obligatory participant. So according to Edgens 2004, again, he explains that the existent usually follows the there is or there are sequence, maybe a phenomenon, and is often in fact or an act or the nominalized action. So example here, in existential process, like there is a dog. So the word is being used is there is, like I explained or like I said a while ago. So now let's moving on with the transitivity in literary text. So this literary text, as we know, is understood to us as the fictional text since they contain literature. It is either a creative or imaginative writing of a specifically aesthetic kind. Literary text becomes the magnet not only for people who love literature but also in linguistics. So literary work has been appreciated in numerous ways. The literary appreciation is likely to focus on authors, words, genres, social movements, and even the whole national literature. So the development of literary appreciation to literary criticism has invited people to apply post-structuralism, postmodernism, feminist, new historicism, Marxist, and post-colonialism. Those approaches observe the literary text and its context with different point of view. They are also able to give deeper understanding of the literary text. So as text analysis also attract the scholars from different fields of study. Stylistic lightens them to conduct literary text analysis. So this transitivity is included as the additional function of language to observe what happened in the text, meaning to see the relation among words in a clause. So the choice of our verbs determines or identify the type of process in clauses being used. So as a result, different process appears. The choice itself is not without the purpose. This choice itself is not without purpose. In literary text, the writer has its purpose. Why character is described in material process. So next is the transitivity in non-literary text. So the non-literary text can be found in printed or online media, like the news, opinions, advertisements, editorials, and many others. So news becomes fruitful data to observe by linguists since this text provides the latest issue or information which happens to that certain society. So news is not merely about reporting events, but it can be utilized to show power by particular group of people. To prove that, the transitivity is chosen by the scholars or the researchers to figure out what behind the text is.